The world knew her voice, ethereal, pure, capable of stirring the deepest chambers of the heart. But behind the applause, behind the Grammy-winning harmonies, lay a private symphony of pain. Alison Krauss, at 54, sat alone in a dimly lit room, the weight of a marriage unraveling pressing against her chest. The love story everyone admired had ended in betrayal, silence, and hidden anguish. What secret could shatter the life of one of America's most beloved musicians? A woman whose songs speak of hope, faith, and enduring beauty. Tonight, Alison speaks for the first time, lifting the veil on a union that had promised forever but delivered heartbreak instead. How could the woman who serenaded millions with delicate strings and angelic vocals survive the darkness that no stage could hide? The answers are raw, haunting, and impossible to ignore. The bright lights of the stage had always been Alison Krauss's refuge. Every Grammy acceptance, every standing ovation, every echoing cheer from thousands of fans should have been a balm, a validation of a life devoted to music. And yet, as she crossed the polished floors of her sprawling home, the silence hit harder than any spotlight. The house smelled faintly of dust and cold coffee, a lingering echo of tension that had settled in corners where warmth once lived. Conversations with her husband were clipped, polite to strangers, but laden with unsaid grievances that hung heavy like smoke in the air. Laughter had become a rehearsed act, a performance behind closed doors that mirrored the audience applause she received nightly on stage. Her partner, once magnetic and attentive, now moved through the home with a subtle hostility that was almost imperceptible. Small betrayals layered upon small betrayals, a quiet erosion of trust. Alison, trained by years of navigating the fickle waters of fame, had become an expert in internalizing pain. She absorbed the cracks in silence, fearing judgment from family, friends, fans, and herself. Each night, after the world had gone to sleep, she sat by the piano, fingers tracing the keys as if seeking answers in the vibrations. The strings hummed under her touch, but the melodies were no longer purely music. They were confessions, tears staining sheet music once meant for joy, now soaked with sorrow. Her reflection in the polished black surface of the piano seemed stranger to her each night, a woman performing happiness for the world while privately unraveling. Even accolades felt hollow. Grammys that had once been symbols of triumph now served as mirrors, reflecting the distance between the life she publicly curated and the one she endured in private. Every flash of cameras, every mention in press articles, every adoring fan seemed a reminder that her inner torment was invisible, ignored, or worse, denied. Her artistry had become a mask, and the more she wore it, the more isolated she felt. And then the tipping point arrived, not with a confrontation, not with a fight, but with a discovery so shattering it threatened the foundation she had spent decades building. A secret, hidden in plain sight, had been quietly undermining everything she thought she knew. It was a fissure that split her world in two, the life she loved and the life she had been forced to endure. The realization struck like a cold wind through an empty hall, leaving her breathless, trembling, and standing on the precipice of an impossible choice. What Alison would do next would define not only her marriage, but the very essence of who she was and who she would become. The roots of Alison Krauss's resilience, and her hidden scars, stretched back to a childhood that was quieter, colder, and lonelier than anyone could imagine. In those early years, the warmth of parental attention was inconsistent. A hand extended sometimes, withdrawn at others, teaching her that love was fragile, conditional, and often silent. Her home, though modest, carried the weight of expectation. The unspoken rules that a child must perform, must please, must never disrupt the fragile balance of adult lives. She learned early that vulnerability was a liability, that showing desire or disappointment invited disappointment in return. The very act of expressing pain became a risk she was never allowed to take. Alison carried these lessons forward into every interaction, into every note she sang, and, ultimately, into her marriage. The patterns were subtle at first. A questioning glance, an unnecessary apology, a hesitation before speaking. She absorbed small slights and minor betrayals with the same quiet endurance she had practiced as a child, internalizing fear and doubt until it became almost second nature. The emotional architecture of her youth, rigid, disciplined, protective of fragility, interwove with the life she built as a musician, creating a delicate but dangerous duality. On stage, she was radiant, commanding the attention of thousands. Behind closed doors, she was cautious, attuned to nuance, constantly measuring the emotional currents around her. The psychological tension of these dual realities weighed heavily. In her marriage, she found herself retracing old childhood fears. A raised eyebrow, a sharp tone, the subtle withdrawal of affection, all echoing memories she had long tried to bury. The instinct to please, to forgive, to internalize became a reflex, even when it cost her joy, even when it threatened her own sense of self. She questioned her own instincts, doubted her perception, and rationalized behaviors that deep down she knew were wrong. Each betrayal in her adult life mirrored an echo of childhood abandonment, a reflection she could not ignore. Even in moments of triumph, when the crowd cheered, when the world celebrated her voice as if it belonged to angels, the shadows remained. Alone in her dressing room, she traced memories like fingerprints, feeling the old wounds pulse beneath her skin. Music became both escape and mirror, the melodies carrying the duality of beauty and pain, light and shadow, love and fear. The juxtaposition between the public Alison, the confident, luminous performer, and the private Alison, the hesitant, questioning, wounded woman, was stark, undeniable, and increasingly unbearable. And as the shadows of her early life pressed against her present, she realized that the patterns she had inherited and learned, however silent, could no longer be ignored. They had followed her into the marriage, shaping every decision, every compromise, every moment of self-doubt. The recognition was terrifying. The betrayal she sensed now was not only from her partner, but from the echoes of the childhood she had never fully healed from. Could she break free from the invisible chains that had shaped her life? Could she reclaim her instincts, her intuition, and her trust before it was too late? Alison Krauss's career was a soaring testament to talent and perseverance, a luminous trajectory that left audiences awestruck and critics reverent. Tours spanned continents, collaborations with musical legends earned her acclaim, and the world seemed to celebrate every note she touched. Yet beneath the glittering veneer of success, an invisible weight pressed down, relentless and silent. The applause, the flashing cameras, the standing ovations. These were the lifeblood of her public identity, but in quiet hotel rooms and backstage corridors, Alison felt a profound loneliness that no spotlight could dispel. The rhythm of touring life offered little comfort. Late nights were spent staring at unfamiliar ceilings, the faint hum of distant traffic or backstage equipment serving as her only companions. Each hotel room was an echo chamber of unspoken anxieties. Did she see the signs too late? Could she have prevented the widening chasm between her and her husband? She would pace quietly, her bare feet brushing against the cold carpet, running through conversations in her mind, imagining scenarios where she could have acted differently, where trust had not eroded like sand slipping through fingers. The juxtaposition of adoring crowds and empty solitude created a tension that gnawed at her, a psychological dissonance that few could perceive, but which she felt in every pulse, every breath. Even during moments of triumph, the internal dissonance was palpable. Standing center stage, bathed in golden light, she could feel the vibrations of applause in her chest, yet it did not reach the parts of her that ached from loneliness and betrayal. Emotional intimacy had become a currency she could no longer afford. The man she had once trusted implicitly now existed in parallel with the version of him she had once known, the charming, attentive partner who had once been her anchor. The divergence between past and present gnawed at her sense of reality, and she began to question not only his integrity but her own judgment. Music, her sanctuary, became both balm and mirror. Each note she played in quiet hotel rooms or on dimly lit stages seemed to reflect the tension between the life she publicly celebrated and the one she silently endured. Guitar strings became confessional. Melodies whispered truths she could not articulate. And yet, no amount of music, no amount of professional acclaim, could shield her from the creeping despair that had begun to take root. The turning point came slowly, almost imperceptibly. Small inconsistencies, fleeting glances, subtle emotional withdrawals, all signals she had learned to ignore, culminated in a revelation that would challenge everything she had believed about love, trust, and her own resilience. Standing alone in her dressing room one evening, after the crowd's roar had faded and the stage lights dimmed, Alison realized that the facade of perfection she had maintained for so long was crumbling. The life she had built, the marriage she had fought to preserve, was teetering on the edge of collapse. Could she confront the truth? Could she reconcile her public triumphs with the private abyss that threatened to swallow her whole? The answer would demand courage unlike any she had summoned before, and the first step toward it was terrifyingly clear. The truth arrived not like a storm but like a slow, merciless tide, creeping into every corner of Alison Krauss's life until there was nowhere left to hide. The betrayal she had feared for months crystallized into undeniable reality. A secret that had been meticulously concealed, now laid bare with an almost cruel precision. In the quiet of her home, the same house that had once seemed a sanctuary, she felt the walls close in, the air thick with tension and disbelief. Each room held memories now tainted. The living room where laughter had been forced, the kitchen where conversations had dissolved into awkward silences, the bedroom that had once promised intimacy but now only echoed loss. The confrontation was inevitable. It was not explosive, not dramatic in the cinematic sense of shouting and doors slamming. It was quieter, more devastating. A look, a pause, a confession that unfolded like a slowly unraveling thread, exposing the fragility of trust she had built her life upon. The man she had loved, the one she had believed was her anchor, became a stranger in a familiar form. Every word he spoke, every attempt to explain, only deepened the sense of disorientation. Alison, trained to absorb emotional turbulence, found herself unmoored, navigating a storm of disbelief, anger, and profound sorrow. The psychological reckoning was relentless. Sleep became a battleground. Waking moments were dominated by memories, regrets, and questions that spiraled endlessly. How had she overlooked the signs? Had her devotion blinded her? Could she have prevented this fracture? Her mind replayed every small incident, the subtle shifts in tone, the unexplained absences, the fleeting glances that had once seemed inconsequential, but now, with painful clarity, revealed the pattern she had been too hopeful or too cautious to recognize. Each realization was a hammer blow to her emotional foundation, leaving her raw, trembling, and achingly aware of the vulnerability she had long masked beneath grace and composure. Even in the public eye, Alison's private devastation was impossible to contain. Tours, recordings, and public appearances continued, each performance a delicate balance between external poise and internal chaos. Every note sung, every audience smile returned, was layered with a tension few could see, a dissonance between triumph and despair. Her artistry became a paradox, a beacon of beauty and skill that simultaneously reflected the fractures within her soul. Music, once a haven, became a mirror that demanded recognition of loss, betrayal, and the courage required to confront it. As weeks stretched into months, the decision to divorce crystallized not as a choice but as a necessity. It was a severance not only of legal bonds but of emotional patterns, a reclaiming of self she had long deferred to others. The process was grueling. Conversations laced with fear and unresolved attachment, nights haunted by guilt and doubt, moments where surrender seemed easier than confrontation. Alison was forced to navigate the complexity of love turned corrosive, to face the abyss of a life she had once believed unshakable. And then, in a moment of stillness, she realized that stepping forward, toward the unknown, toward freedom, was both terrifying and essential. The life she had meticulously curated, both public and private, had fractured, and she would have to rebuild it from the shards. The first step demanded courage unlike any she had summoned before. One misstep, one hesitation, and the past could consume her entirely. The question lingered in the silence. Could Alison Krauss rise from the wreckage of betrayal, reclaim her identity, and transform pain into purpose, Or would the shadows of deceit define the rest of her life? From the ruins of betrayal and heartbreak, Alison Krauss emerged not as the same woman who had once sought perfection in love, but as someone profoundly transformed. The divorce had carved a chasm through her life, yet within that space, she discovered a fragile but undeniable freedom, a chance to reclaim the parts of herself that had been sacrificed, silenced, or ignored. The grief, once heavy and suffocating, became a source of clarity, illuminating the resilience she had cultivated through years of internal struggle. Every note she sang now carried the depth of her experience. Every chord resonated with the duality of pain and renewal. Music, always her sanctuary, became a mirror of self-discovery. In the solitude of her studio, Alison poured emotion into melodies that had previously been restrained, shaping sorrow into beauty, disappointment into harmony. The strings of her violin wept in tandem with her own tears. The quiet hum of the piano filled spaces that had once been silent with fear. Each song was a confession, a reclamation of voice, a testament to survival. Audiences, though unaware of the full extent of her personal struggles, sensed the newfound depth in her performances, the raw intimacy that transcended technique and fame. In public, she radiated poise and composure, a figure of grace and elegance admired by millions. Behind the scenes, however, the process of rebuilding herself was painstaking. She confronted fears she had long buried, the fear of trusting again, the fear of opening herself to love or friendship, the fear that the shadows of her past would always lurk at the edges of joy. Slowly, deliberately, she reconstructed her identity, integrating the lessons of pain into a more resilient and authentic self. Each small victory, an unguarded laugh, a private smile, a performance that felt like truth rather than show, was a thread weaving her back together. Alison's legacy transformed along with her. No longer was it measured solely by Grammy Awards or critical acclaim. It was now defined by courage, authenticity, and the power of survival. Her story became a quiet inspiration for anyone who had endured betrayal, loss, or isolation, a testament to the possibility of rising from heartbreak without losing the essence of oneself. Yet even in triumph, the echoes of her journey lingered, a reminder that healing is not a linear path, and that freedom comes at the cost of facing one's deepest wounds. As the curtain falls on this chapter of her life, Alison Krauss stands at the threshold of something enduring. A life reclaimed, a voice reborn, and a resilience tempered by both sorrow and grace. But the lingering question remains, whispered beneath every note she plays and every silence she endures. Can true peace ever be found after such profound betrayal, or is the shadow of the past an inseparable companion in the pursuit of freedom?